Athens,
Yeah, sorry.
of, of Athens,
Forgot.
and the way people were thinking about what Wilhelm Nestle would call the transition from mythos to logos.
Right.
Mm. You're aware of Wilhelm Nestle?
Yes, I am. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know the thing about the mythos, the transition
Yes.
mythos to logos. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is another interesting moment because logos again has been translated as word or etc. Lowly, I like the translation that I like the best of the logos is giving an account of something, giving reasons for something.
Yeah.
I like that because if you look at the background, what are the conditions for the production of that reason? What is the production, of that reasoning? So very, very important reason.
Very, very important.
Okay. So, yeah, no, good, George. And Judith Butler, I'll have to read it. I've never read her on Antigone. I respect Judith Butler, but to me, Lacan and Heidegger, are worthy of the study time and time again, with all due respect. Yeah, yeah. And I mean,
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
It's not a big book. It's a small book, but
yes,
it's interesting because it shows the problems that arise between law, kinship, and ethics.
right,
Um, and how does one surpass these problems?
right. Well, that's Lacan. That's part of the
Yes, okay.
ethics of psychoanalysis, right?
Uh, and that's sort of a Greek family,
Yes,
uh,
I know Greek families very all too well.
how they
Yeah,
function even today in modern
right,
Greece.
right, right.
Yes.
Right, good. Okay, so I'd like to go back. I mean, unless there are any comments, I don't know if this kind of discussion interests most of you, but again, I find this play, this drama and dramatization, and again, George is there where you can see the Greek national actors do this, and pretty amazing too. I've seen one production of Medea in Greece. So yeah, another great Pasolini film. But all to say, I think it's important. It's important for our time, etc. And yeah, uh, uh, Antigone initiates I really think the modern, imaginative feminism, if you will, in some ways, many ways. That there's a lot there. These laws are not of the state, right? Right? She knows. She understands patriarchy extremely, extremely well, and through her uncle too. And if you read carefully, I mean, I've only read it in English. I haven't read it in ancient Greek, but it's interesting. Who also did Jean Ennui? The French dramatist did a version, as did Bertolt Brecht, right? Yeah. So it's not like, this legend and this moment is very, very active in left and also resistance French literature in the 40s as well. Yeah. And yeah. And I had the pleasure of having a short conversation, not too long, but substantial, with Judith Molina at the cloisters in the East Village. That was the old living theater, the Julian Beck, and back in the day, experimental theater, and she considered Antigone the founding act of modern drama, modern women's struggles. So anyway, she was another player. So someone we unfortunately don't have with us anymore. But yeah, but she continued the work of Julian. The living theater. They still have their place downtown on the Lower East Side, still going on. You know, not in as big a place that they had before, but still going on. So anyway, yeah, good, George. I'm looking forward to hearing more more interpretations and films and dramatizations of this because it really opens up a lot. I'll try to find a friend of mine's old book, The Truth in Eros, which makes the claim that Antigone is the founding document of psychoanalysis. Yeah, yes, yeah, Antigone and her hysteria, right, is the founding document. So that anyway, that's kind of post Lacan, in some ways the interpretation. Anyway, to go back to our friend Bernard, to Stiegler, I started to look again at some of the sorry, let me just get my light here. I have a good light. I think that what's very important, the passage that's been assigned. Um, For tonight, I thought we were going to begin grammatizations and and look at the sections, including the regimes of writing too. Um, I think again this moment, right, uh, um, is again very important for Stiegler, this grammatization and the default of origin. So I'd like to begin again with the section on the concept of grammatization from Sylvain Aroux. This is page 229, Grammatization, Noesis, and the Socratic Dialogues. And he translates at the bottom noesis as a process of exteriorization. And again, I like this as Stiegler at work here: expression, invention, and realization of works in all their forms, only by undoing itself, defeating itself, and undoing itself through its grammatization. So it's always looking again at this writing machine and what forms are being constructed and what new forms are replacing them. This is, I think, part of his, penchant for neologisms, right? So pensée, thus conceived, is not limited to the discretion of mental flows, but gestures have been analyzed, reproduced by automatons ever since the artifices of Van Casson. I know I read this last week, but I think it's important we begin in this kind of his shift in a way. And again, the absence of epoch does not mean that Stiegler is conceptualizing a new epoch or wants to, in a sense. He doesn't really want, in a way to do that. And again, he's just looking at again, these epochs, a way of looking at epochs and the epochal as a historicity, as the history of writing and grammatization, these processes. So please keep this in mind. This is not an ontological moment or a new ontology, if you will, only in terms of the technics, but it is something that is not really trying to put in a new epoch. He does not, I don't think he sees himself as building the new epoch. Okay, so anyway, I think again, this is very important, right? Um, um, again, this double movement of remedy and poison in the pharmacon. But on page 231, the hermeneia of the default of origin, the tragic process of knowledge and proletarianization. And again, one can critique this, and I know, again, we mentioned last week, that proletarianization for Stiegler does not mean it's part of an oppressor and an oppressed situation, although that's there. There's no question about it. But it really means that this inability to make things, that the generalized proletarianization has developed in terms of the digital leviathan and the digital economies, et cetera, that this is it. And he goes back to his case study, right, if you will, of Florian, alongside that of Chris Anderson of Wired magazine. And if I could read this to the new path, right, of pensée tries to confront the proletarianization of pensée as such, the wounds, right? And celebrated by Chris Anderson in his article, The End of Theory. This is page 233, right? And and he basically says, where he asserts data science makes linguistics obsolete. So people such as George and myself who have a fascination with language, translation, etc., we're just obsolete. We're anachronism. I'm going to start a society, the anachronism, right? That's what we really are, anachronistic, right? I wanted to do a bookstore proposal once, just call it anachronisms.
Yeah.
We get all kinds of characters in that place.
So,
Just from the
so I
name.
stay up late at night for you calling me names.
Yes, we're obsolete. Yeah, we're anachronistic. Yes,
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I can't help it sometimes. Bear with me.
Okay.
Okay. So which Google substitutes the applied mathematics of what he calls linguistic capitalism. And I like this too, because again, it emphasizes the gaga language that everybody's subjected to. You know, my students, every other word is like. Everything's awesome. Everything is, or either awesome, or annoying. This is the double meaning. This is the poison and the remedy, right? And so the awesome could be the part of the remedy that they would get to the Greek sense of the strong sense of wonder in which the awe-inspiring overtakes them. But that's not what they mean about awesome. You know, it's cliche, right? So anyway, the new path became extremely deep when I spoke in a work I'll call the unthinkable or the unimagined wounds, right, etc. Words spoken by a boy named Florian, 15 years old, right? Yeah. And this is Florian speaking, right? In a sense, you really take no account of what happens to us. When I talk to young people of my generation, those within 2 or 3 years of my own age, they all say the same thing. We no longer have the dream of starting a family, of having children, having a trade, having ideals, right? As you yourselves did when you were teenagers. All is over and done with, because we're sure we'll be the last generation or one of the last before the end. So this is Stiegler's meditation in a way, is about, this representative, teenager of his generation, right? In a sense. So in the most recent period, the Anthropocene, which everyone currently understands, if you will, in terms of the challenge of climate change, amounts to an unprecedented and incommensurable putting into question that suspends and breaks all those circuits of trans-individuation that have been established through the millennia, from the Neolithic to the great empires, and through the various theological, political civilizations, and finally the secular civilization. So he speaks of today as an end, or possibly as a telos in the strong sense of the word, as both a limit, a boundary, an objective, etc., and a goal. I'm sorry. There was a matter of learning to create such circuits with the pharmaca that made them possible, and it did so on all those archives, whether explicitly or not. Hyponesmic tertiary retentions always constitute, and which underpin the retentional systems in which social systems seems fundamentally consist. This is very interesting too. Again, and we've been through this somewhere, but I like the way he summarizes this to say this is where we are today in this absence of epoch, reading the case of or case study of Florian. At the end of the Anthropocene, that is today. So he's writing the end of the Anthropocene, and as the experience of disruption, that's where we are, massive disruption. Hubris as such, the notion of what led to the formation of the pre-Socratic Greek civilization, and therein the noetic foundations of the West, returns to mortals as a massive increase of entropy on a global scale, right? Right? And necessitates the development of an anthropology. But in contrast to Levi-Strauss' nihilistic discourse at the end of Tropique, when he refers to anthropology as a rather disillusioned tone, I argue that this anthropology most profoundly calls for a Neganthropology, right? Very interesting. In the remainder, I will try to draw out the consequences that follow from the Anthropocene having reached its critical phase, and I will attempt to do so reconsidering what Derrida termed difference, right? In a way. So I want to point this out again. He has this is a very crucial framing, if you will, yeah, today, where we are today, of the end of the Anthropocene, as today, right? Yeah. So he goes on to the next section, which is basically, he goes through many things. Christophe, I don't know their work, Bonnuil, and Jean-Baptiste Frezos, I think is his name. Yeah. Uh, distinguish various periods within the Anthropocenes, the Thermocene, the Thanatocene, the Pleistocene, the Phronicene, and the Polemocene, right? Etc. So all these scenes, obviously all Greek words, once again, right? As for the new current, and if not the ultimate, or at least penultimate or anti-penultimate period, it constitutes entry into a critical phase of the Anthropocene that will itself undividedly be divided, undoubtedly, be divided into another sub phases. So this is again where we are today for Stiegler, to a catastrophe or a catastrophe, right? And we must therefore make a decision, crisis, which we can relate to the covering apocalypsis, right? Such a period would be the commencement of the impossible critique of the Anthropocene, that is, of its analysis and its pensée, which constituting the synthetic possibility of its analytically impossible overcoming, would pursue the question of hermeneia, right, occurring in and as the après coup, if you will, the cut after, and that's a Lacanian frame reference in which the severance takes place between terms, and you're into something else. So Promethea and Epimethea, the two brothers, and as the ground of any heuristic, right? That is research, science, thinking, and care, as well as teaching, didactics, and especially secondary and tertiary education intended as pedagogical preparation for science, research, and pensée. This means, here, dedicated to engendering a bifurcation that would be analytically impossible from the internal perspective of the system from within which it's produced. What I'm here calling an impossible critique means the impossibility of keeping it to the analytical plane and the necessity of projecting it onto the synthetic plane. So you're talking about a complete rupture, if you will, with this is really revolutionary thinking, because it's a rupture with all previous framework thinking, right? Paradigmatic thinking that we're become very accustomed to, because he says it leads away, it's kept on the analytical plane. This amounts to an interpretation of what Whitehead and of we're called the function of reason in as much as it decides. We will see why such a necessary impossibility must be conceived and cultivated as an improbable possibility in the sense of a neganthropic bifurcation. With respect to questions, such questions, hermeneia, heuristics, didactics, pedagogy is striking to see, and I've read some of these papers. I actually have a copy here, I think. I think it's here. I'll show it to you. And GREPH foresaw what is happening today. GREPH is an acronym for the Group for the Research of the Teaching of Philosophy. This was a group put together by the Telltale Group, possibly later. Let me see. I think I have it here. I think I. If I can't find it, forgive me, but I thought I have it. If not, I have it in New York and I'll bring it next week. Anyway, it's a collection of all the work they did together. This was a very, very, very active group that, of course, was disbanded by the state. They went, again, I'm sorry, I thought I had it here on the shelf. I'm usually pretty good with finding things, but not tonight. Anyway, maybe in between. But yeah, it's a nice paperback French book. It's called The Group for the Research of the Teaching of Philosophy. It was founded by Derrida, Sarah Kaufmann, Jean-Luc Nancy, Lyotard was part of it, etc. Back in the 70s and early 80s. So let me go back to this again. This is again very, very important, right? How the epoch of the 1970s and the Habib plan still managed to drastically underestimate in a way that is retrospect is startling and literally unimaginable the extreme gravity of the situation which was then just beginning to take shape and the excessiveness of which will receive consideration only from Heidegger and on the basis of the Greek question of hubris. And this is the great term coming in, a term used by Aristotle in the Poetics to discuss the tragic hero, right? Even though he himself failed to draw the consequences. But he was the one that went back to the hubris, right? In this extremely grave situation, any form of true noetic knowledge necessarily becomes as true pensée research heuristics into an exit from the Anthropocene, that is the Anthropocene, so as to enter the Neganthropocene and does so as a therapeutic interpretation as hermeneutica of the pharmacological situation. So the method is hermeneutics, right? A radical hermeneutics, right? Which will be part of the interpretive strategy always. It's no longer analytic, right? It's hermeneutic. Anyways, so we can talk about that. And George, correct me if I'm wrong. From what I know of the ancient Greek and some of its use in philosophy, analysis means to undo, right? To loosen up. And
Yes.
yes. So
Yeah.
there's another thing too that he's looking at. So the hermeneia is a kind of maybe bringing together in the circle, right? Some meaning back, right? to
Yes, exactly.
analysis, right? So we have this going on. So he wants to go, and I know I read this before, but I want you, I mean, in some ways, I find this so very important for the time we live in. The thing about Stiegler, unlike many other philosophers who are also jockeying for, the great breakthrough and reading the Critique of Pure Reason or something new in Hegel, the great thing about Stiegler, he's really concerned with the present age, right? Absolutely engaged in the present age and where we're going, right? In a way, he is a thinker of the future. He's not a traditionalist in the sense that he's bringing together things. He's not a historian of philosophy. He's not a historian at all, right? He's trying to think through, based on this dialectical play, if you want to call it that, or a bifurcated play in some ways between the anonemic and the hyponemic, right, together. This interiorization, this internal recollection that is able to make connections between ideas, right, that is still human, and our real capacity as human beings in this process from in trans-individuation, or what Simondon calls transduction, that it should always be part of the learning project, is to engage transduction, I think, because this is where you really do disseminate ideas. This is when the learning happens, in a sense. And he's also, again, going, trying to go beyond this all the time. Yeah. So I want to again say this dialectical tension that he's always creating between the two forms of how we process, right? In terms of our recollective processes, which we've lost the capacity to do. I mean, I can't stand driving with some friends. They're always on the Google Maps. Take take this way, etc. And I use my nose. I can smell where the carbon's being emitted. Let me tell you, there's a tire, etc. They kind of laugh. I mean, all I'm trying to do is make a point that, you really need a satellite to get around this stupid city, knowing all the ins and outs and all the little bypaths. So anyway, yeah. So I always test Google, I get in trouble when I'm testing Google. Sometimes I win, sometimes I know a better route, and I find this particularly I don't know, frustrating in Canada because of all the interchanges, and especially Montreal has become a completely a car-oriented city for all of its bike and walking and etc. The gridlock is unbelievable, in a sense. So I'm always trying to figure when I drive, when I'm here, figure out ways how to get around it without using the Google, etc. You kind of just you have to put yourself in a different mindset. So recollect what worked in the past, why would that work today, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, this is always a tension in Stiegler, this exteriorization of memory. And I know I've mentioned, I repeated, the industrialization of memory, the second chapter of the second book on time and technics, is ontology, is a crucial chapter for the understanding of this notion of the hyponemic exteriorization that takes place, how memory has been industrialized, etc. Yeah. Let me just go on to we in our epoch, and I know we mentioned this last week, and I want us to again think of the mode of production, what we're doing, and constantly engaging, and again, repetitive, I hope in a good sense. The screen is our mode of production. This is really the new mode of production. I will ask my friend, it's be late at night for him too, like George. He's about 2 hours earlier, who's in Madrid, to come, who has a very good unpublished manuscript on the screen as the post-Fordist movement, right, in Gramscian terms. A very interesting person, Ivan Zot. So maybe I'll bring him on. I think David's met Ivan, yeah, back in the day. So anyway, I want to go. Yeah, yep. So very interesting here in this epoch, and I'm reading from Stiegler again and repeating in some ways. 235, bottom of the page. In this epoch, we still greatly underestimate the gravity of what weighs upon us and seems to crush us. Right? Seems to crush us. Today, faced with the Anthropocene and the gravity that expresses itself in and as its critical phase, to which Florian bears witness, is no longer being able to have uh, uh, diurnal dreams, a period in which the question of an organology of nocturnal dreams also arises, which lies behind the analysis of Jonathan Crary, Capitalism 24/7. Yeah. As well as the 2009 Ken McMullen film, An Organization of Dreams. The challenge is not to plead for a right to philosophy, because this was what Greff was doing. It was creating the rights and the rights to philosophy. And this is an ongoing, again, this is a historical remark and anecdotal, but I think it's important. Derrida and Stiegler had long conversations about, the university without alibi, right? In a way, a book Derrida put together about the university, what the university means, etc. So anyway, I want to point this out. Again, teaching and to defend the perpetually threatened teaching of philosophy in the final year of French secondary education, We should be so lucky in the United States. A right that must also obviously be defended. The only legitimate approach, the only approach capable of legitimating such a defense and attesting to it as a self-defense. And this is, of course, the Greek word apologia, right? Socrates is in self-defense. He's not saying he's sorry. He's in a moment of self-defense, hence the title, The Apology, right? Apologia, right? Yeah, I'm going to tell you where I am. Apo. And I'm going to give you an account of the reasons of where I am in some ways, and I'm going to defend myself, right, in a sense. But as you mentioned about the suicide, earlier that the wanting to commit suicide of Antigone, Nietzsche thought Socrates was suicidal too. That he could have left town, Crito was already ready to get him out of Athens, right? They had the escape ready, but he decided again to drink the hemlock. Again, another crucial story in the history of philosophy one has to think about. Was it a courageous act? Was it a suicidal act? Was it a combination of both? Right, etc. Right, in many ways. Right. Yep. So, such a defense, attesting to self-defense, is to assume the duty of philosophy, and of course, this is, a play, if you will, on the apology, right, on the Crito, right, on these dialogues of Plato. So the study of philosophy is pensée, that is a new careful thinking of what is called thinking, right? And this is interesting too, because what he's taking on here subtly, and I mean maybe explicitly to readers of Heidegger, is what is called thinking, a pensée of pensée, which requires us to care for thinking, right? Including from within an organological and therefore pharmacological perspective, wherein facts are destiny, right? Imposing in a new way, the question of how to distinguish the right facts and as their difference against the indifference of denotatization, right? What is the duty and of the pensée that philosophy tries to embody in its broader vitality, that is, in the acuity of its untimely timeliness, right? To encounter, to listen, right? To receive, and to interpret the testimony of Florian. Right? This is interesting. Well, how do you take care of generations? What does this mean, this generational time? What is going to last here in many ways, right? So goes on, right? And to do so in a context we were suddenly seeing from Pope Francis is an unhoped for, well, he's gone, if not a totally unexpected opening which calls for a response. And to what dialogue with religions? The question arises in France in a singular day after the tragedies of January, November 2015, then of the 14th of July 2016, after with 14th of July will be for over more than a national mourning of the national holiday that since 1790 has celebrated the Federation. These questions of our time do not present themselves, they absence themselves. And this is interesting too. Instead of a presentation, this censorship that's going on in the universities and this kind of destruction of core curriculums are absencing themselves with administrators, etc. There's no real rational debate going on. I don't know about you, David, Beryl, who teach Caroline, that there's no real rational debate about what should be in the core, what a core represents, what would be a changing core that's more today, if you will, right? But how to retain things. This to me seems to be the battleground in a different way, where this taking care of generation this happens. So again, I want to say this is nice. Do not present themselves. We do not present things anymore to administrations, to the educational departments, the National Labor Relations Board in union struggles. They absence themselves, though what I have attempted to describe is denial, right? Okay, this is what results from an absence of epic, that is the suffering of Florian, and that Dash exploits so as to mobilize in France and the entire world, is in the youth of the entire world, the agents of what we call negative sublimation. Negative sublimation. Right? So long as we have failed to reflect on the excessiveness of the Anthropocene, of which suicidal and criminal behaviors of this kind are symptoms, we will only increase its destructive power, which accumulates to the limits of the Anthropocene as it reaches its greatest extremity. It is this extremity that we call, again, the disruption, to push the disruption. And again, the book where we started a little bit in the beginning, again, in the disruption, not the disruption, but in the disruption. We're in the disruption. We're in the world like Dasein and Heidegger, but for Stiegler, we're in the disruption. We're living it. We're living it. And it's creating massive confusion, massive disinformation, massive new programs of stuff where people actually believe this stuff, right? That's coming down, et cetera, right? Nobody understands what propaganda is anymore. It's really sad, very, very much, very sad. So then he goes on, of course, to again, in the thinking carefully of the emergencies. Maybe I'll stop here for a second. I know this is repetitive somewhat from last week, but I think this is important for us to think, are we in the disruption, right? is the task before us, to, as Stiegler advises, we're at the limit of the Anthropocene. It's no longer worth thinking about using that kind of language, etc. How do we retrieve a kind of energy, if you will, beyond the entropic that we find ourselves in, etc. And how do we go about this? And I just want to say, the gravitational loss, he says the first duty of philosophy, and I like this too, thinking carefully about the emergency. I find these sections today, absence of epoch, very important, and also thinking carefully. Every one of the sections are good, but I like this very much about the emergence. The first duty of philosophy is to consider the sudden and absolutely singular aggravation of a situation that has been described as man without gravity, without weight or without seriousness, but the result of which is extremely grave, which is what goes to Florian's words, their incommensurable weight. With this gravitational loss characterizing our age, the grave, as ever and paradoxically, no doubt presents itself in its very gravity, but does so in general through a denial which forms very widely and in relation to which Florian constitutes an exception. To philosophy falls due, and I like this, falls due the duty of eliciting of what has been denied. And this is again very much out of Derrida, make the margins speak, right? Gramsci too, in some ways, in terms of the subaltern. This goes back to questions that were raised in the 80s and 90s. But what has been denied, that is the grave, the incommensurable weight, not just of the world, but of the squalid and the befouled, right? Right? Very important. The falling due that in the 20th first century, and again, here we go, he's going forward from falling prey in Heidegger and being in time, that we fall prey to, that in the 21st century it falls to philosophy to think carefully about. Philosophy, therefore, finding itself obliged to think and care otherwise. Again, very, very important. This is what we have to consider. What I like about Stiegler, I like this about the late Heidegger, thinking otherwise, thinking completely outside as much as we can, outside this disruption, that we've come to, and to think it through so that we can think of a future, right? We can begin to think and premise a future, right? The maturing of this obligation presents itself not as just one of the test of the always late tenor of this pensée called philosophy. That's a stab at Hegel, but it's the ordeal of the absolute monstrosity that it was heralded by Derrida in the opening of Grammatology. What is this monstrosity that's facing us? And to go back to the monstrosity, too, you see this in Antigone, this monstrosity. Yeah? To think about the horror that she undergoes, what the state can do, et cetera, this monstrosity of the sight of thinking, right? So, and the deconstruction of metaphysics to Marxism, psychoanalysis, and which had become, and I know I read this last week, but again, I want to repeat it, small business in Jean-Luc Godard's sense, psychoanalysis as small business, right? And we did so, but so did too epistemology and anthropology, among others. They all became small businesses, or what we call in the academy cottage industries. Cottage industries that when I was kind of growing into philosophy, half the dissertations were written about Jürgen Habermas or Jacques Derrida or deconstruction, right? Yeah, yeah. No longer did you have really an out, right? Today, buzzwords, Gilles Deleuze, right? In the French scene, right, etc. Without really an understanding of where Deleuze is in the history of philosophy and what he's responding to, in a sense, because again, the anonymous, the recollection of that period has been denied to many, many graduate students, to many people that are studying. They don't have that background, again, given. They write well formally, but unfortunately don't have the background to see and to lose, the old debates between Bergson and Heidegger, if you will. Bergson, Einstein, inability to meet with each other. They don't have this kind of substantive moment that allows them to really, move forward. I'm not talking about the Justin Clemens of the world or my friend Miguel Vater. They're different generation and different types. But in general, you see this coming down so much, right? That where no one understands what's being reproduced, if you will, and how it's being reproduced. And to go back, what's being created is cottage industries for professional organizations, etc. Yeah, I like this. I don't think you ever met her, David. She was around, though, when you were studying at the Graduate Center. Catherine Liu, do you know her work, The Virtue Hoarders? Yeah, it's a very interesting work about the virtue hoarder. She's look her up on YouTube. She's funny too. She's Chinese American and she discovered her working class roots and she's becoming more militantly Marxist now after being very immersed in French theory, but without the Marxism. So yeah, she's a very interesting figure. Yeah, out there. Yeah, about virtue hoarding, right? In a way, right? Yeah, the professional class. So let me go. Only a consideration of the gravity of the next, and this is him being prophetic. And again, I'm thinking Socrates, warning his accusers and his convictors of what's to come. But Stiegler is doing the same thing. Only a consideration of the gravity of the next 50 years after a critical retrospection of the past 50 years of philosophy has any prospect of earning back. This is interesting. The credit required for it to take care of knowledge, of science, of law itself, and with these forms of knowledge and all other forms of the life of the spirit, and therefore of art, all these figures that seem today in the eyes of the vast majority of our fellow men and women, and especially the youngest, to look little more than zombies, look like little more, to be little more than zombies, right? In a sense. So how do you bring this back, right? And then he's going to he moves into the next section, which is the tribunal of the future. What will this tribunal look like, right? In a sense. And of course, playing on, yeah. So again, this is very, very important to again, from today, right, till to the beginning of, if you will, where we are in this disruption and how will thinking carefully about the emergency come forward? What is this gravity, right, etc. Then he returns in the next section, the tribunal of the future, to the reading of Grammatology. And again, I'm sorry we don't have the time once again to go through all of Grammatology. It's a remarkable text that was completely engaged by the elite institutions. It filtered down, unfortunately, typical trickle down kind of stuff. Some of it's not worthy of trickle down, like Milton Friedman's economics at the University of Chicago. But the elite institutions turned, Derrida into a cottage industry. I mean, this was a huge industry that was created around Derrida. I had a friend at Johns Hopkins, a woman who was studying Italian. She was a Dante scholar back in the day. And she called me up, "Are you going to see God today?" I said, "Who?" And she said, "Derrida is here." So he's giving a lecture. And so this is the way it was related to in many ways, right? So anyway, it wants to line within the epoch of the absence of epoch. And this is where Derrida, called Heidegger nostalgic, that there's a nostalgia of the last man. This is interesting too. We've talked a little bit about this in the Heidegger sessions, if you will, that the last man, right, would appear, right, as this last person before the overcoming or the Übermensch would come, right, in a sense, the overman, in a way. Yeah. And so anyway, this was, this presents itself, the absolute danger. This is what the absence of epoch does, that people cannot take it on. It's an absolute danger that presents itself as a sort of monstrosity. It is far from clear the readers of Derrida have yet to take the measure of the situation. And this again is here, right? The reader, this was in fact one of the issues that I discussed during my thesis defense. This is Stiegler speaking, right? Which is good, one of the issues. There's not, Monsieur Derrida, my advisor, put out this call in Grammatology, but we have not examined the gravity of the situation yet. So anyway, the contemporary situation is that of an imminent catastrophe, of which telegrammatology was an imminent warning. So you see the old, biblical prophets rising up. Jacques Derrida from Algeria becomes Jeremiah, and more Ezekiel in some ways is probably a better prophet to look at. We'll switch regions a little bit from from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea for a little while. But anyway, this is what's going on right here. So it was an advance warning, and it is the imminence that 22 signatories tried to formally declare in an article published in Nature in 2012. And, Caroline and George, going to John Clarke's Dialectical Social Ecology, these are important references here. The title, Approaching a State Shift in Earth's Biosphere. It is a question of a catastrophe or a shift for upheaval, a mutation, a bifurcation, which we can understand in the different senses of René Thom, who's a French mathematician, very, very, prominent at this, or Pigarin, Ilya Prigogine, and Isabel Stengers, the historians of science, who are worth reading. They're very good storytellers. I'm not so sure about their theories, but they're very good at telling stories about history. Conditions are gathering for a bifurcation, and next week I hope to give you some analysis of bifurcation, or 2 weeks when we're back with a blackboard. I'll break down this term bifurcation for Stiegler. But as yet, we do not know in what direction it will propagate. Philosophy, and with it knowledge in general, have the obligation before any other tasks of weighing, or rather of exceeding, the gravity of the situation. of highlighting and curatively bearing hubris such that it invests not only the traditional instruments of measurement, but the concepts that they materialize. So he's calling for a curatively bearing hubris, a kind of pride, and I would call it a healthy arrogance. I always like what Frank Lloyd Wright once said. This is, very reductive and simplistic, but he did say, he was asked, what are the right paths in life? He says there are only two paths. One is honest arrogance, and the other is hypocritical humility. Right? In a sense, right? And I kind of like that, this architect that bucked the trend for a long time. I like some of his stuff. But anyway, it's a nice way. What are the two paths? You can see yourself in Parmenides meeting the goddess of the night. What two paths will the horses take? You have this door, the honest arrogance, and you have this door of hypocritical humility. And you know that hypocritical humility is completely connected to non-courageous cowardice, terms that he uses interchangeably in the disruption. So anyway, let me go back to this. So again, very, very important here. It has become crucial to express itself, for which Aristotle originally constitutes the negative treasury of noetic life. The consequences of this situation cannot be ignored, can now be ignored, only if we remain not only blind, but cowardly in the precise sense of cowardice that befell Heidegger in his time. So he's setting up something here very philosophically in his arguments against Heidegger's notion, if you will, of care and how it led him in some ways to be, lack of a better term, fixated, seduced, entranced, whatever, by the National Socialism. Yeah. So I want to go back to this. The potential structure of our age, awaiting, I always have problems with the lights on double screens. I'm sorry. Yeah, awaiting a shift whose probability is widely felt, right? Awaiting a shift whose probability widely felt and expressed through a symptomatology of denial in the face of what Florian's candor erupts, is accompanied by a stunning mutation of the arrangements of retentions and protensions that constitute the expectant, pending beings that we are. This mutation has everything to do with the industry of traces, the data economy, and again, I emphasize the industrialization of memory, as well as with the fulfillment of the Anthropocene, which is nothing other than the effective fulfillment of nihilism as the generalization of entropic becoming. So here's the last man in the Anthropocene, right, before we have the overcoming in the moment, right? In a sense, and he's taking very seriously the notion of the Nietzschean Übermensch, leaves without a trace, right? There's no trace in some ways. This is a kind of interesting thing that one is now. The nihilism is the destiny of the West, right? It's the generalization of the entropic becoming where we came to. And I think about, Peter Bratsis, my good friend, and I, he's always talking about, the churches, the papas. We used to have a slogan with Syriza, tax the papas in Greeks. We would solve the currency crisis. And of course, we were warned by the Greek comrades, you can't go against the Greek Orthodox religion too deeply. You have to be careful when you're dealing with this. We should compromise a bit. So I begin to think about this, how much Christianity, in some ways, as an invention, if you will, this resentful religion in many ways, in the Paulinian version in the beginning, how much it has really messed us up away from the Greeks, right? And the earlier, Old Testament, wisdom and allegories and symptoms, and of course the Chinese warring period and the tendencies that go there. And instead, we built this Judeo-Christian, moment, right, in some ways, because it's really the Christians reading the Jews in some ways that takes the upper hand right here. I mean, Freud's reading the Greeks. Marx is reading the Greeks, right? They're seminal, in a way. They're this kind of interesting moment of what Joyce calls Jew Greek, Greek Jew, two extremes meet. If you want to think that through as a Joyce and Finnegan's Wake. So anyway, yeah, how much it's given, how much has been done in its name, how bad it is, how unhealthy, and how when Nietzsche criticizes this in Twilight of the Idols, all the way to the Neoplatonists, and of course in the Antichrist as well, when he polemicizes against this, he really is talking about the tendencies for this religion is to end up in nihilism. It wills nothing at the end. It really wills nothing. That's its will to, impotency. So I don't know. I'm just, kind of throwing out a few things here, but I think this is very important to keep in mind. And again, what Stiegler is trying to do is again saying, he's not really mentioning Nietzsche that much, but he's really coming out of that position, as is Derrida, in, more sophisticated, more modern terms, that takes into account cybernetics. But Nietzsche, and this is Heidegger too, really saw the destiny of the West as nihilistic, right? And if you look at what we're witnessing today, this is unbelievable. 14 more people killed in Venezuelan boats, right? Give us an idea of this destiny of the West. What is the war machine doing at this point? So this is totally horrific. And they hear about it, they criticize, they're taken to court, and they still do it. It's in your face all the time. And yeah. So anyway, I want to just read a little bit of this, and maybe we can stop there. This structurally entropic is effectively fulfilled nihilism, summons reason itself before the tribunal of the future, right? So again, this question is, again, this old debate that went on between Derrida and Foucault on reason and madness. Of course, Foucault wrote The History of Madness. Stiegler himself, I philosophize so I don't go mad, right? Yeah, in a way. Reason thus summoned is what Whitehead understood both as an organ and as a function. This is interesting as in terms of reason, at the core of what constitutes a speculative cosmology. And I know we, again, read this last week, but I thought it was so important we need to go over this again, right? The duty of philosophy today, again, is to consider the entropic catastrophe to which the Anthropocene is leading us, which is an event, but which is more precisely the advent of nihilism as Anthropocene. I say this just as Levi-Strauss said in the Anthropocene. He said it back in the ancient epoch, the Anthropocene, I like this, right? Becomes an anthropology. But unlike Levi-Strauss, I do not believe we should abandon the responsibility of which Neganthropology is the question as well as the study. Of the Neganthropology is the question as well as the study. It studies the conditions of possibility, and this is interesting too, this new term, this new, if you will, moment, more than a moment, a new scene, if you will, of impossibility that bifurcation always required in a manner that exceeds all calculation and analysis, that is, exceeds the understanding by convoking reason. Neganthropology can only be constituted within a speculative cosmology, conceiving the cosmos a process which localities, and again, important here, a process which localities are produced that give rise to various feedback loops of discontinuities, the kinds that Schrodinger, Atlan, Prigogine have all tried to describe, and we're on another register I can briefly mention, as does Claude Shannon, Norbert Wiener, John Forster, in some ways, Gilbert Simondon. These thinkers, however, all leave out one essential, and that, again, leads us to attempt to reinterpret his most famous, Derrida's most famous concept, the trace. Less the trace, the Archie trace or Archie writing, that is the difference as the deferral of entropic and anthropic deadlines by pensée, right? In a way. So very important here. The new Hegelian, the owl of Athena, if you will, Minerva, they always say, but the owl, I like the owl of Athena better, right? Before imperialism, the Greeks were not imperialists. The Romans invented Imperium Roman. So, yeah, the Greeks had other difficulties. But anyway, um, like to go back here again, this whole thing of the trace, right? We're going to try to discuss this. I will when I get back to New York, I'll locate where the trace is and best articulated by Derrida in Grammatology. The trace is a very important concept in Derridian thought. Right? So again, the College of Philosophy, the inner science. He goes on through many things here. Beryl, you know the Collège de Sociologie, right, in France? The Marcel Mauss, Georges Bataille, Walter Benjamin was there. There's a who's who of sociologists that got together and created an alternative college. Do you know this group? This was a very important group that was created for the sociologists of this period,
Right.
1930s and 40s. It's great.
30s,
Benjamin got
yes.
upset with Bataille because Bataille wanted to go see an actual sacrifice, human
Right.
sacrifice, and got very
Yeah, he was
disturbed. Very disturbed with Bataille about this. They were friends up until then. After that, Bataille
Right.
was more friends with a few other characters. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, this is a very, again, I want to mention, once again, emphasize how important this section is. Being in the disruption, number one, the absence of epoch. What does this really mean for us today? What is Stiegler really trying to do here in terms of these notions of the pharmacon, and of course creating this new category, the Neganthropocene, right? This new category of where we are. It goes beyond the Anthropocene, goes beyond the capital scene, etc. Yeah. I mean, these are obscene to Stiegler, if you will, in the negative sense of obscene, right? in a way. So yeah. So anyway, yeah, maybe I can hear from you guys, and we can go on because I want to the history of the future will be very important later. You can certainly look at this. This is page 229, 259 when he goes into technics and the ontological difference in knowledge. I mean, the massive learning that this man has and what he's exposed to and tries to take up is very impressive. And I think I have a sense of what he's really trying to propose as the way out in many ways. This otherwise thinking is something we desperately need, especially on the left, because the thinking for the right is no thinking at all. It's just accumulation by default constantly. And, we can think, every day the stock market goes up. I took a short position about a month ago thinking it was going to go. I mean, luckily I didn't bet too much, but anyway, just overrun insanity, irrational exuberance. You can't beat it. Yeah. Anyway. So, David, any thoughts? I see you pensively and reticently there absorbing. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Not really. I mean, you were speaking earlier about Stiegler's. I forget what section it was, but you were talking about unions and academia The absencing oneself. At Rutgers, just the Turning Point USA chapter of Rutgers just ran Mark Bray off of campus and out of the country. They targeted him and doxed him.
Right.
He's part of like all the organizations. So all of the most active and activist faculty know Mark Bray and are in orgs with Mark Bray. And we absolutely cannot get any momentum behind doing anything in his defense at all among faculty, among the unions, among even the other faculty orgs that are to some degree kind of independent of our AFT unions. You know, I think it speaks to number one, a mobilization of the youth by the right. Is part of what's going on there. Is the TPUSA chapter at Rutgers has done a very good job. Stanley was right, but the left did not create a generation of lawbreakers. The right did. And so what we have on campus at Rutgers is an example of this, there's no boundary to it. The same TPUSA is targeting a professor who presented a slide about women's genitalia in like an appropriate setting. I forget what she was talking about, what the subject was, but because she described something as a female penis, and there was a TPUSA student in the room, that professor has now been doxxed, and TPUSA is demanding that professor I'd be fired. I'm not sure what they think the university is going to do. So there's a repeated and consistent sort of assault that the right has found a way to maintain and maintain the energy for, maintain the commitment to among the youth, right? Like this is a very strong movement on campuses that we, whatever the we is, don't have a response to. The student movements around Rutgers are beginning to organize kind of, but there's no faculty leadership. There's nothing they can do. So they have discussions at like their Rutgers University, the Student Association. But that's it. There's nothing else. There's nothing else to it. And in the Stieglerian sense, I think this has a great deal to do with the lack of sorry, Mike, you can correct or fill in the vocabulary, but the lack of long circuits of generational memory we have institutionally and among left movements on campus. We don't have easy reference points to draw from to say, well, obviously what we do when somebody gets run off campus is take over buildings like Columbia in '68 or whatever. Like we don't have, so we get into these discussions where caution is asserted as a strategic necessity, and that's where it ends up.
Right. If I can add to that, and then thank you so much for bringing us back down to earth after all this abstract level of thinking that Stiegler goes through. It's a very good orientation for you know, a concrete, if you will, orientation of thought. I don't like the word application and you know, or applied thought. You know, I think of orienting the thought in a particular direction. So very good. Thank you. You know, for example, you know, in 2016, before LIU got out of control, and think, Sean, were you still working there in 2016?
No, I left in 2013.
So Sean's a prophet. He's a soothsayer. He saw the future, the handwriting on the wall.
I knew that I should leave once Klein came in.
Yeah, he went right away when the new president.
Within a month, I was gone.
Yeah, I hear you. Right. So anyway, going back to this period, you know, I just came up with a kind of, if you will, very simplistic slogan: put education back in the hands of the educators. You know, so when you were saying about lawbreakers, you know, all I wanted to do is to put the educators back in control of the core curriculum, in control of, you know, everyday practice in the university, et cetera. So of course the fight was always about, you know, We should not be managers. This was the first buzzword that came up. We're professors, we're not managers. And this has nothing to do with management. It has to do with workplace conditions and what are you there for? So anyway, all to say, you're right. I mean, one's ability to present is absented, right? In a way, he's very, very crucial on this. There's a denial. There's no space in a sense. And the problem once again is the fight is really to occupy the institutions, like they did back in the day, to occupy. Of course, you're going to have a confrontation with the police, but this is one way you win over youth, in a sense. I mean, I know so many people who came, in the 60s, that were, had no understanding of why the war was being fought in Vietnam, right? Why we were there. You can remember these days. You can also remember, the post 60s and 70s, unless you had something to offer, right? An understanding. And this is what the right took, right? The left were the lawbreakers back in the day. They were the ones that were attractive. They were the ones that were the outlaws, in a sense, right? Right? Yeah. In a sense. We all went to Chinatown. And then Jack Nicholson, is told that's Chinatown, Jack. You can't go in there, Jake. You remember the end of Chinatown. That was an end of an epoch to me, in terms of a movie phrase. Little books of little, statements from film noir. Right. So anyway, you're absolutely right, and this is the problem today. Because this is really the problem. Yeah, in so many ways. And the retentional capacity. I don't know how I get on these things, but I have an old very good friend, very bright man who was a president of a university, but all he wants to do is text about sports with his group of people that includes one of my cousins, and that's all they do. They think they know more about general managers, players, all this kind of stuff, and never really want to talk about politics, unless it's something, about this woman Levitt and, how she met her match somewhere, or, the Trump scene, which is easy. It's a huge moving target, the Donald Trump show. But they know this. They know this already. They already know. They've got the, the carousel ready in the circus, to go through all of this. So I think you bring up a great point, and the unions are completely complicit in all of this because they don't want presentation. I'm going to tell you a story that I just learned today. I went ballistic in the meeting. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, really ballistic. I heard we had an arbitration coming up next week on the core curriculum, that it was taken out of the hands of the faculty. There was procedural violations. It looks like it's a damn good grievance. It finally got scheduled for November 12th. It should have been scheduled earlier, but we had problems with the arbitrators, and all this kind of stuff. So it's scheduled. So it turns out that the representative of the quote parent union, right, postponed it till February or March. Meanwhile, they get what they want out of the core curriculum by this temporality. He didn't contact the grievance officer nor the president of the union, to give you an idea how this works. George, you wouldn't believe how backward the American unions are compared. I mean, yeah, at least the Greeks hit the streets, take over the dockyards, right? Yeah, etc. Unbelievable. And I know your experiences at Rutgers where they talk a good game, right, in a sense, but when push comes to shove, is there really that moment of really taking back the university, to take back something, right, in a sense? Because it's completely out of the hands. This is basically a robotized, automated thing. And he's going to go on in the next section. I'll read from it before we go tonight, and we can pick this up in 2 weeks. Give you some time to to read over the Stiegler. Maybe read the whole section. I'm gonna probably reread it again. This one is called Caring. But anyway, why he becomes so interested in this pedagogy and what is the university about? Always there. The United States has 15 million people in higher education as students and $2.5 trillion worth of debt. I'm sorry to use the statistics, but it's mind-boggling. 15 million students in higher education. Yeah. And if you listen to the news, you would think everybody's in the sixth grade, the level of the presentation in the sixth grade. Sixth to eighth grade is the level of the political discourse. Even Mondani, they're dumbing down now. I mean, in a way, I understand we got to get elected. I understand the mantras, keeping the base energized and all of this. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I mean, hopefully he's, this kind of new kid on the block. But look, I'm very cautiously optimistic that you may begin a discussion of what is democracy and what is socialism and why they call it democratic socialists, who are their history. I would venture to say that most of the people in the DSA have never read a word of Michael Harrington, who's one of the founders. They have no idea that he was the translator of Georgy Lukács's What is Orthodox Marxism? No idea that Georgy Lukács, you go of the 90 or 100,000 members, Georgy who, right, etc. Right, in a way, yeah, who, keeps coming up in my mind as someone who would understand this. He would say, "I told you that Nietzsche was an irrationalist. Look at the nihilism going on." That would be Lukács talking to Adorno, and Adorno, "No, you're not reading. This is a symptom of a period. It's a metaphysical sending, according to our brother Heidegger, in the Black Forest." Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder too, Michael. I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
the relationship between sort of these organizations and movements and tertiary retention,
Yes.
and the way that like DSA acts as like a kind of moment of tertiary retention of the history of the left,
Good
one
point.
of the only in the U.S. And it's a bad one for all the reasons that you just said.
Terrible.
And that's my experience of it as well. In the chapters that I've had contact with,
Right.
nobody's read Capital and whatever. So like DSA and then like the unions are organizationally the sort of largest sort of institutional moments of tertiary retention of the left outside of then like just university spaces, particular curriculum. And it occurs to me that this is like we can think of the lack of spaces and relations of like left tertiary retention as one of the sources of our lack of everything else. So we have nothing to refer to. Among other problems that it creates is when we're in these fights over decisions being made by these organs, these bodies like unions. We don't have a common reference point that we can point to and say like Stanley used to, and say like, AJ Musty didn't fuck around with this bullshit. Like we shouldn't be either. We need to organize and hit the streets and whatever. And like you can, there's nothing to be said in these spaces that would resonate and would say, yes, that's the call to action, because we all know that story, we all know that narrative, know that history, and now we feel like we're participating in it ourselves. And now we're in the protension, right? Now we've turned those tertiary retentions into a protension, and now we're moving. And we don't have the narrative, we don't have the retention to tap into or draw from.
Or the retentions are so pale and misguided and misappropriated that they're not really there. I mean, I think you were there when we first started to do the Brecht classes, right, many years ago. Stanley did the history of the left for a reason. We talked about that. I did the history of materialism for a reason. I mean, I had reasons for this. And it was great that David's been doing this a long time, and anyway, yeah. So
well, and it's a good example, Michael, actually, that like I didn't know the left existed until I wandered into first Stuart Ewan's class and then Stanley's class. And like for me, it was a huge moment in my life. Like the sense that I make out of the world has a vocabulary, and it has movements, and it has classes that I can take, and all this stuff. But that's one of the reasons that I think I'm like I feel this lack of space and relation where these retentions can be activated and discussed, because it sucked to not have them. And to think that like I was an isolated individual who just thought about things differently than my sort of police family environment sort of taught me to.
This week, how many people can appreciate what Joan Baez told Caroline Levitt, with this press secretary for Trump, this little snot? Excuse my language, but anyway, she is, and she cuts off people. You talk about absence, right, etc. Just, that's what they do. They know who they're going to call on, and any of the critical reporters aren't in the room to begin with. So when they get a semi-critical question, but anyway, suppose we should call Joan Baez as only a singer, because she made some comments. So Joan Baez said to her, "Listen, you stupid little privileged puppet," or puppet of privilege, which she used. You have no lived experience, etc. You're basically, just this little girl, get away from me. When you come back, when you're a woman, talk to me, or something like that. It was really great. I like this term, the privileged puppet, right? Yeah, in a sense. And, it comes across this way. But, if you have tertiary retention in a way, and I'm not saying, listen, I was born, as a part of the baby boomers, but I can remember songs. I know who Flo Reese is, who precedes me. It doesn't have to be present to you. I know the language, I know which side are you on by heart. I know the Communist International by heart. But anyway, we don't have people with this ability in DS, going back to DSA, etc. And when people hear privileged puppet, who's she referring to? Her friend Bobby Dylan, like a Rolling Stone. You used to dress fine, did your time in your prime, etc., etc. None of this understanding of what people went through in terms of, siding with, right? Siding with those who were underprivileged, those who were minorities, those who were, to use older language, right, etc., with this class and this different kind of merging. People forget, jazz clubs were closed in New York City because Jewish guys started getting involved with black women. They were afraid of the combination, and black men were even worse. Were getting involved with Jewish women. Yeah, so you go out and you look around, and they said, "Oh, this is a dangerous combination." With the Rosenberg trial, with all this, etc. They started closing clubs, because of this. This is how dangerous the tertiary retention is. But then nobody knows this stuff anymore. I go to jazz clubs. Nobody knows the battles between uptown and downtown, jazz musicians, what went on in terms of the cards that certain giants were unable to play. Can you imagine Thelonious Monk is unable to play because he doesn't have the card because of a drug habit? Can you imagine that today? Yeah. And you're getting George Santos out of jail, this bombastic, idiot, here in New York. Trump pardons him, and no telling who else is going to get pardoned, right? And all this. The crypto guy's getting pardoned, right, etc. And you're listening to this. So anyway, yes, I mean, tertiary, you're absolutely right, David. And you can talk to the union people, NYSET, AFT, Randy Weingarten knows nothing of this history, in a sense, just a player with all, yeah. I mean, she's a rabble rouser, right? But as Stanley used to say, Randy spent a half an hour in the classroom. Right? She doesn't, what is she representing? And anyway, made the deal of teaching to the test that ruined a whole generation's possibility. What's been taken away is the possibility. This is what Florian's complaining about, to me, is the possibility. That's why I think Stiegler uses this Derridian language, that sometimes can become a jargon unless you really understand where they're trying to go, in terms of the history of philosophy, the impossibility of possibility. This is Che Guevara. Be realistic, demand the impossible. This is what he used to say, I don't know if you knew that, but yeah, in a way. Yeah. So, yeah. And listen to today what happens. A German woman who lives in Bolivia kills, the Bolivian operative who kills Che Guevara. She assassinates him. a Marxist. So you talk about these kind of stories, etc. Here we are, we talk about Venezuela, we talk about Cuba, we talk about all these places in a sense, but nobody's bringing up these struggles that made Latin America what it is. The Mexican Revolution, this kind of stuff. We're just always horrified. 14 more people killed today, which brings the total to 75. Yeah, I mean, whatever. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we were talking about earlier. I think we see the fear of, so like we see the attack against these tertiary retentions, and we see the fear on the other side of building them back up because of the way the attacks are expected. So I'm thinking, like, in using the example of Mark Bray at Rutgers, our unions, my union that I used to be an elected leader in, our response should be to run a series of events right in the middle of
Absolutely.
campus celebrating anti-fascism.
What is Antifa? What is Antifa? Who wrote the book? He wrote the book, the definitive study. I mean, and this is crucial. And everybody in this room can be accused of being a member of, quote, Antifa, right?
Of course. And our attitude should be, yeah,
please.
should be, let's do it.
But personally, I don't care. I'm like, the Gestapo comes, I'll laugh. What do you do? I'm like, my friend Pulitzer, one of my great heroes, George Pulitzer. He would give lectures to the working class on philosophy. Great book, Elementary Principles of Materialist Philosophy. Yeah. And he was captured by the Gestapo. 9 months they interrogated him for names. He didn't give one name. They finally killed him. But according to his wife, she was getting the reports, he just kept laughing every time they asked for a name. He make up things, And you look at Godard's reference in Weekend. Do you remember God appears on the with the camera around his neck when the car is broken down, and they ask him for miracles. They ask God, and God says, well, they ask, who are you? It's, I'm God. I'm the son of Alexander Dumas, and God. And here I am. I give you miracles. The woman says, I want a weekend with James Bond. You stupid bourgeois. This is your wish. This is your dream. He goes off. He won't get, and then he blows up their car, right? Funny, but this was a reference in a way to, you don't name names, right? The surrealists were good at this too. This was their beauty with language. You don't name names. You code things in a certain way. So again, Stiegler, I think this tension, and this is what I like again about him. The pharmacon, remedy, and poison. It's a both and always. You have to think always both and. Right? The same thing with primary, with retentions and protensions. You want to think of primary, secondary, and tertiary retentions, as well as that protension into the future. You're always thinking the both and. So it's not only just, retentions are not just about history, right, per se, in this way. This is about what is the protension of that history? What is the futural moment for it? And he's always dealing with this phenomenologically. Yeah.
And that was,
please. Yeah.
The quick point I wanted to make about anti-fascism a moment ago was connected to the point about Marxism that you were making, that like the kind of action that you need to be like connected in the way that you just described, both to the past of the movement and to the future of the movement, acting in a moment. Like that's what makes somebody capable of saying, well, I'm going to get that guy because he killed Che Guevara. And so that's you have to experience yourself as part of that. And concepts like Marxism, like communism, like anti-fascism are opportunities to build out tertiary retentions in ways that like we can connect to, relate to, and turn into protensions. And so it's not an accident that anti-fascism is being attacked this way. And it's also not an accident that faculty who otherwise should be in full solidarity with Mark Bray, faculty who write about things related to fascism and anti-fascism, are afraid of associating themselves and hoping they can hide enough to avoid the trouble, because that word isn't just a word. The concept signifies a set of tertiary retentions that can very easily turn into protensions, and therefore it's dangerous as hell. And so it's being attacked, and we're afraid to participate in it and to really jump in and say, yes, of course, let's celebrate this and grow with it. So it's not an accident that these words become these kinds of targets, and then we on the left become afraid of identifying with them because of them being targeted, because they're our path to building these kinds of retentions. I think they're so important. The language is so important to it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when he talks about linguistic capital too, this is very important to understand. And it has always been part of a problem with Chomsky, even though I have great admiration for him, his political interventions, his historical knowledge, the way he tries to educate people. He actually believes if you make people conscious of things that they're going to act. I think there's a lot of falsehood in that, a lot of in many ways. But the thing about Chomsky, what he could have done is put together a team, given his ability as a linguist. One of the great linguists of the 20th century. He could have put together more than just hints in manufacturing consent. He could have done a linguistic study of this. Reggie Debray tried this in Paris. He tried the mathematical approach in a book called He tried to create a field called mediology. I don't know if you know about this, David, but he tried to create a new field in France called mediology. And this is Reggie Debray, Debray, speaking of Che Guevara. Yeah, too. Yeah.
And Allende.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that, George? Sorry?
And he has that long interview with Salvador Allende as well.
Yes, he does. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. Very, very, very well positioned leftist from France for many years. Right.
Yes. I totally agree with you. And this is what I repeat quite
I'm
often.
agreeing with David. So, but go ahead.
Yeah. I agree with both of you. I mean, what we lack today is disseminating what we call our tradition. Like you said earlier on, you know songs that maybe come from different trends or tendencies. What is interesting is that, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, when I started talking about the history of the working class, maybe mostly in Europe, because I'm not that good in American history. The social centers or wherever I would have the speech or the lecture, a lot of people would come and they would ask me a lot of interesting questions, which surprised me because they didn't even know simple things. We would talk about the Paris Commune. We would talk about what happened in Berlin in the 20s, or council communism and so on, and the attempts to change the world. I remember when I was in Berlin, and a group had invited me. Uh, we were supposed to talk about 2 hours, and it went over 3.5. And they disrupted our discussion, but the questions were amazing because people were asking more things, and some people who knew a few things would come and say, "Oh, we have this too, and we have that too, and what are we doing? Why aren't people knowing about these things?" And I definitely agree with both of you, and I think that more things should be done to change the outlook of the young people. David correctly pointed out that the problem today is with the young people because they have no idea of what the tradition of the left, or whatever left means anyway, is. Um, so this is one important thing that will continue to discuss. The second thing that I found most interesting is about Christianity. Uh, thanks to Plato and Plotinus, and of course to Constantine the Great in the Byzantium. He created
Title of Alexander. Don't forget
yes,
the first Jewish Platonist. Right.
yeah, okay.
I'm sorry.
Uh,
Very
This is
important
how,
in terms of the term. Yeah, yeah,
yes, this is how history has developed. Okay, let's not go to what happened with Luther and so on. Uh, and the third thing that I want to point it out is from the beginning of the conversation. I found the text because I was really interested. I had no aware that it even existed. Is the one about Antigone. It's the Antigone complex. It can be found in
yeah,
Stiegler's book.
yeah,
It can be found in Stiegler's book. It's called, just a second,
yeah.
it's called Uncontrollable Societies of Disaffected Individuals. It's the second volume of
Right.
Disbeliefs and Discredit. I would just put it in the chat.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. I had forgotten where it was, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
appreciate
it will come. It will come. It will be very useful because I'm starting seminars in Greek on Antigone.
Good, good, excellent. We want to hear about that. That's excellent. Yeah, 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 yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
Yes. Well, it's a shame Irene Papas isn't alive anymore to talk about the depth of the character. It's still one of the great performances in Greek cinema, her
Yes.
portrayal of Antigone, right? She's good in State of Siege. She's only 5 minutes, but it kind of makes the movie. She, in fact, overshadows Yves Montand. Yeah, not State of Siege. Z. Yeah, yeah, the earlier Ghost. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, good. Yeah, but I mean, David really brings up a good point. The role and the dissemination of retentional, knowledge, and of course, there's both end of the protension and the retention. And yes, an excellent thing, observation is that the right has captured the lawbreakers. Yeah, yeah, in a way. I don't know if you know this TV Netflix series with what's his name? It's Chris Spader, Blacklist. Did anybody ever see Blacklist? This kind of a Raymond Reddington, this anarcho-capitalist that is part of a international syndicate, and he turns himself in, most wanted man, turns himself into the FBI, and the FBI is all too happy to have him in there as a new source. He's going to give him a name a week of international criminals, right, in a sense. But this is what the right is doing, in a sense, right? Yeah, again. And, people say it's all about the money, but, look at Mondani in some ways. Again, I'm not a Democrat socialist. The last thing I had, I had a text from some people, they want to come to Casas. I said, are you sure? You're going to become way left of DSA. They laughed, Anyway, but Mondani, in a sense, has put together a grassroots campaign. $5 to $25 donors that Bernie Sanders built up. The question again with Bernie Sanders, to me, and what the left really needs to consider in these elections, Sanders did not go his own and create an independent party. These people want to represent the left wing of the Democratic Party in the United States, which goes back to the old leftist slogan in union struggles: the bosses have two parties, we have none, right? To be co-opted, it's already formally and materially in place. So this is a real question going forward. But again, the left is not mobilized, in a way. You have in New York City, I think I read to you all the groups here. We have, 8, 9 locations where people are trying to do political work. But again, they're not unified. There's not really much behind them all, right, in a sense. They do their own thing. There's not really much discussion between that. David, when you were when we had the Brecht, Liz Mestras, who used to be the director of the Brecht Forum, came and asked me and Rick Wolf and Bertol Oman and other people, Stanley, of course, and other people. We need a party for all the left journals, monthly reviews, situations, rethinking Marxism, etc. Doesn't happen even today, right? In a sense, right? Yeah. So anyway, so again, yeah, it's what the right has done very effectively in a way. And Steve Bannon's going to tell you, it's a Leninist takeover. That's what he's going to tell you about what's going on in the White House. He's going to use that in that way. Yeah. 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 Donald Trump's the friend of the working man. We get this out of the hedge fund treasury secretary, right? Right. So, yeah, they know this language. Yeah.
And Scott Bessent is a soybean farmer, right?
Yes, he's the guy. Yeah, he's hedge fund. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Soybean. Yeah, he's a hedge fund soybean farmer. Yeah.
Yeah. For folks who don't know, he appeared on the
I'm,
Sunday
I'm,
show.
I'm working with the soybeans during the day, and I'm playing the market at night. And he's going to say, "Oh no, I learned the soybean market, and then I learned how to hedge, and I played the futures market, and I was very successful and talented at this." Right? Yeah, beans.
Scott Bessent said he was on, for folks who didn't see it, he was on the Sunday shows, and he was asked about farmers and how they're getting hurt by the tariffs, and specifically soybean farmers, because
Right.
China's not buying any soybeans.
Right.
And Scott Bessent, literally, his response was, he smiled a little bit and said, "Well, I'm a soybean farmer myself." And of course, he owns some land on which soybean
Right. Of
farmers
course.
do
Of course.
soybean farming. But this was his very
Guess
proud
who they're in competition with on soybeans? The Chinese. Hence the 100% tariffs. Right. Right. Again. Right. Yeah. This used to be a nation of, I mean, I'm in Canada right now and pulling for the Toronto Blue Jays against the entertainment capital of the world, Dodgers. But anyway, heartbreaking loss last night. But anyway, uh, the problem again is the United States no longer has diminished from 25% of the world's manufacturing center to 9%, 8.5%, 9%. It consumes 25 to 27% of the energy, depending on what statistics you take seriously, who you're reading, of the world's consumption, with 3.5% of the population. We consume 8 times, the regular amount if we were in terms of an equal distribution of consumption. So in some senses. So again, very, very important to remember these things, right? Yeah, going forward. We spend more than Russia, China, the UK, and France on military combined, right here. And don't spend it well. That's another thing that's never brought up. The Russians have better weapons. The more I read about the Russian weapons, I've got pretty good contacts. In fact, Arto, who you guys know, actually can give you the precise terms on this. But here we are. Yeah, nothing, right? And what about the Chinese and technology? Why are they so worried about TikTok? Etc. Why? Yeah. And they can put together these things, these AI machines, much cheaper and better in some ways. Yeah. Now I don't know about the cars, but I know I have a couple of friends that want to buy the Chinese EV, and yeah. I heard they're pretty good. I don't know.
The BYD cars they're the most popular and best made EVs in the world. They have the smallest batteries, last the longest, all that.
There you go. Goes to show you. So here we are. We're hearing about making America great again, making America, making America stupid. That's the mass movement, making it stupider and stupider every day. It's problem because this is Stiegler, and I have to say, my enemy viscerally all the time. My enemy, just the systemic stupidity that we're witnessing. And this plays into what you were talking about earlier, David, this whole notion of, the lack of retentional, capacity. Yeah, yeah. You have to, yeah. And part of the struggle in pedagogy is to be able to give, reference some kind of culture to these students. And it's very, very, very hard to do because the high schools have ruined them. I know, Beryl, you're probably better in Australia in the school system. I would think so. Just given, no, not really. Okay. I mean, it is awful here in terms of what's coming up, in a sense, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's the
Something about the cars. since the States are, I think, ahead of every other country in the world in self-driving cars, you won't need to be concerned with the GPS or Google Maps and so on. You'll just get into the car, you'll drive, you'll read your
Oh, I
philosophy
know,
books.
they can do it for me. I know, I know.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, how far ahead are they really? Uh,
Well,
is
yeah,
this thing working really or not? Because in Greece, we don't have any self-driving cars or any approach to it yet.
right. But you can still afford a meal in Athens. You can't afford a meal in
Yes.
in some places. You can get a good meal with a good bottle of wine. You know, I mean,
Yes.
I was shocked. I took four people out. Leslie knows some of them. Panagiotis, you didn't meet Costas and Alexei, but you met Panagiotis and Kassos. And four of us went to dinner in a very nice, comfortable restaurant. And you know, in Greece, you don't tip; it's already included in the tax that they put down. The waiters tip. So anyway, I always give a tip, and of course, I'm thanked. I have to do it underhanded because the boss doesn't like this when they see it, right? That the waiter is getting extra money, of course, typical. But anyway, four people. We had appetizers, salad, huge salad, Greek salad. Each had a good meal, lambs for some, et cetera, et cetera. You're talking 100 euros for four people, 110 euros, including a bottle of wine. in a neighborhood where everybody looks half intelligent. It's a place where Varoufakis got beat up, where the Golden Dawn sent some people to beat him up. Same restaurant. Yeah. Very
Yes,
good. Yeah.
that restaurant belongs to a friend. His
Oh,
name is
really? Good.
Tamas. Yes.
Excellent. Excellent food. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. He's from Chios.
Oh, he's from Hios. Okay. Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So great, great. I mean, when you think about this too. So yeah. But I'll try to get Von Zotz from Spain, get him on one night and make him wake up and, talk about the screen as a new mode of production. And, now, of course, the automated society. I mean, again, the thing I like about Stiegler, he's on top all, he might not be right about everything. We're not really here to produce just a tribunal of, critical theory about, whether someone's thought doesn't have contradictions where there are areas that need to be rethought only. We're here in a sense to understand really where we are today. And again, I think he in terms of his own the memory of him and the retentional ability that we have with him to see this mind at work, etc., is very important for our time, really, to my mind. Not the only one, of course not. But his his abilities are quite remarkable, and what he's trying to synthesize here too. Yeah, yeah, you know, in a way. He forgot to mention though that a good glass of Hitachi whiskey or a good single malt is very good for the writing machine. This is something. The poison is sometimes the remedy when you don't feel like writing. Just take a good glass of, Macallan 12 or 18-year-old, or a good Hitachi Japanese Suntory whiskey, which is very good too. Yeah. So anyway, look, I mean, this is pretty clear the way this is shaping up. Japan just elected a fascist prime minister, right? So we have that axis developing. Where are they going to discuss all this the military buildups right now? They're going to South Korea. Yeah, yeah. So you have to think about this. What is developing in terms of the military-industrial complex, and what are they doing? Because again, what we learn, what Stiegler is missing in some ways, I think Mauricio Lazzarato gives us in a different way, at least in terms of an opening, wars and capital, right? From a more, if you will, a different kind of militant perspective, in some senses. Yeah, yeah. Lazzarato doesn't have a full-time job, by the way. One of the most brilliant thinkers of our time doesn't have a full-time job. Luckily, he has a wife that can hold down the fort. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so David, we're looking forward to next week. I brought the book with me to Canada to read while I'm here, and again, and we're looking forward to Monday. And I'll be in touch with your students. Has the Left Forum been sending out reminders? Are you getting anything? Did the
I
Institute?
haven't. I'm on both the Left Forum and Democracy at Work's lists, and I haven't seen it.
I'm really mad. Rick Wolf called me, wanted a favor. I'm going to tell him no more favors, and until we get all our people on the list. I don't understand what's going on. You're on the
I
list.
don't do it. I watch all his videos. Come on, he was there at the Brecht Forum too. He was one of my. He and David Harvey were my introductions, along with Stanley, obviously, to Marxist economics.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, Rick got kicked out of Monthly Review. He was their golden boy because he went to work with Louis Althusser for a year.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think he's forgotten those days though. He likes to tell the stories about it, but the epistemological break is not foremost on his mind right now. Yeah, but he understands ideological state apparatuses. So I'm going to call them tonight and find out. Yeah, it's a
That's
shame
great.
because they should be sending this out. Josh has been good on this. Very good. Yeah, yeah.
And the flyer looks great. It's so cool.
Can you go to your promotions file, by the way, and spam?
It did go to promotions, not spam, but promotions.
But can you change that to where it would go to your regular email?
Oh, sure, yeah, and I have checked that. So, like
Okay.
the Left Forum,
Okay.
and it's not like Left Forum sent it out and it escaped or whatever. I've checked.
That form didn't go to promotions, though?
The it. I could probably change the settings, but for me, it's I always check the random stuff gets sent to promotions anyway, so I always check it. But I don't know. I don't know how to avoid having.
I just want to be, when I start arguing and yelling, I want to know what yeah.
I am as sure as I can be that neither Left Forum or Democracy at Work sent it out. I've checked all of my different.
Okay, good. They were supposed
things.
to, and that was a moment. Yeah, okay, good to know. Bunch of incompetence. Okay, all right.
As best as I can tell.
The left
everybody here, please do consider coming. It should be a lot of fun. It's a relatively short book. Jack's going to come by the second to last or last session to talk about themes that we discussed over the course of the book. And it's very, I feel like it does a really good job of connecting Stiegler to some very on the ground questions. Jack is trying to dig into both the theory and practice of microfascism and what anti-microfascism would look like from the ground up. It's a very cool book, I think.
Great, great. Well, I'm looking forward certainly, and I'll be there. I'll be driving back just to make it.
Oh, great, great. I'm glad you can. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited.
And vote for Mandami the next day. This is
Yeah.
the first time I've gone to the polls to vote for a mayor of New York City since David Dinkins, because he was part of the black aristocratic class of Harlem back in the day, and he knew some of the great communists of that period. Ben Davis being one of the great ones, and I mean, New York did have heavy hitters in terms of, especially the black left, got big time. Belafonte, Belafonte's godfather was Bumpy Johnson. He was covered on both sides, but Bumpy Johnson is the godfather of Harlem.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. The movie Shaft is about Bumpy Johnson, and the TV series also about the mob. Bumpy Johnson's played by Forrest Whitaker, always going up against the Italians. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we should do a class on the mob and the mob story. I mean, I'm just kidding, but anyway, yeah. I grew up in New Orleans, so I don't know what to say, and yeah, yeah. So anyway, I got in trouble because of I went to high school in what was that? I think it was about 10 or 11, and I got in a fight, a friendly fight with and with one of the mafia's second in command's son, right, Frank Atchapini. And the kid was a little bit, he was slow on the take, so to speak. So he went home with a little bit of a beating. I'm not saying I got beat up too, but not by him later. But anyway, right. It turns out that Atchapini calls my father because he knew him from some deal back in the day, and just said, boys will be boys. This is healthy. This is the mob thing. This is good. This is good for their character. They're fighting in early days. So anyway, I heard about this later, after many years later. Yeah. Yeah. He called me. He called me. Yeah, right. Anyway. So yeah. But anyway, yeah, I mean, the left had good connections too, back in the day too. And what these kids don't realize, DSA and others, is the connections too that were happening between the Harlem Renaissance and the union movements and all of this. And what George was talking about, the American version of council communism that happened with the Claude McKay, the entrepreneurship, if you will, Black entrepreneurship movements, right, in Harlem, right, and how this worked. Yeah. And people forget the presence of Malcolm X, what that used to be, how good he was, that Malcolm X could go before a crowd in Harlem and there'd be 5,000 to 7,000 people in the audience, and we'd get on stage and he would say, I want to welcome the CIA. I want to welcome the FBI. I want to say, we know who you are. And then he would say, it was great. Then he would say, for every one of you, there are about 750 of us. Just want to welcome. I hope you enjoy what I have to say and you learn something. And that was it. That's the way it would open the speech in Harlem. I mean, I heard this through very, very good sources, right? In a sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He met with Stanley one time. I can tell this story. I don't know if Stanley just told me this or if it's true, but supposedly when Stanley was organizing, you guys didn't know Aronowitz, but Sean did, and certainly David. But he he was one of the big organizers of the March for Jobs in 1963. Yeah, and this was King's March for Jobs, etc. Stanley was close to Bayard Rustin. He was assigned to this moment. And so anyway, Bayard Rustin said, we need people from Harlem. Listen, I'm going to put together a meeting. I don't know if he's going to come with Malcolm X. So Stanley said the meeting happened, right? They met in Hell's Kitchen at a diner. All the way in the back, Stanley said, was Malcolm X sitting, and he sat down, and Malcolm X said, what do you want? What can I do for you? And he says, well, I need people for the March on Washington for jobs. And Malcolm looks at him and says, why would I do that for you? He says, well, because you care about, jobs for your people and dignity and all this. He goes, I'll tell you what, I'm going to send you 10,000 people, but this meeting never happened. And that was the end of the conversation. So anyway, I'm sorry I'm in an anecdotal mood. I had a long Google Maps confrontation today too, on top of being without the internet. But yeah. But anyway, we'll get back to there. So we'll be 2 weeks, right? Because I'm going to be Mondami. Maybe, if you want to, we can Zoom people in if you want to see if there's a celebration. The polls now are showing Cuomo creeping up. Well, Cuomo is a creep. So yeah, creeping up is a good verb to use. Yeah, yeah, for him. But I think he's going to win, and I think the pollsters, or the way the polls are reported, and something we should look at, are trying to make the population think, the betting line is changing. Go with the up and coming guy, in a sense. So there is something there. Yeah, yeah. But I've seen the ads; they're despicable. I don't know, David. You've seen some of the ads that he's done?
I actually haven't seen any of the hit ads. I have seen a lot of the hits on I've seen a lot of his surrogates on cable news. So I'm very familiar with the line they're using against him, but I
Right.
haven't seen the ads.
Right. Yeah.
It's ugly. I mean, the line they're using against him is straightforward. That this is like an invasion. It's a very us versus them. Like we're New York City, and he's part of something that's
He's
taking over
9/11.
the city.
That's the new association that's being created in a potential way without any retention, tertiary retention. He's 9/11. Would you want this guy in power? This is Andrew Cuomo. Would you want this guy in New York City guarding you against another 9/11 type attack? Yeah, yeah. It says it all right there. The Islamophobia, the whole bit. Yeah, right. And then he shows the black alcoholic on the street, right? He shows the guy with the sheiks, from Bushwick, right? All supporting Mandami. This is who New York is, right? Only, right? Yeah, yeah. These are the supporters of Mandami. It is disgusting the lengths he's gone to. Yeah, yeah. That they'll go to keep this from happening. And this is, look, underneath it all, it's totally, for whatever term you come up with, it's still anti-communist. Maybe not the kind of communism that was actually existing, but certainly anti-communist that this happened once and it's not going to happen again, right, in a sense. The taking of private property by three major revolutions, right? This is basically the underlying fear, right? Many ways. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's of course it's Islamophobia, but that's secondary. This religious stuff to me is secondary, but it plays very well because most of the society is not secular yet. We haven't even had that revolution in the United States. It's still a church-going, believing country in many ways. Yeah, yeah. And this is out there big time. So, hey, Bill Ackman going on TV, who has nothing to do with politics. This is a hedge fund guy, by the way, if you don't know. William Ackman, made his career on inside trading like they all make. And I can tell you how this works because I've been to the New York Racket Club and I sat in there watching how these conspiracies are framed. I was a kid, 13 years old, but I had big ears, we're going to buy this. We're going to buy X amount of shares. We have a target price right here. You buy some. I'll start selling into it to camouflage it. Then we're going to buy some more when it goes down. And then we're going to put out rumors that it's going to go up. I've talked to the CEO. We know exactly what the earnings are, et cetera. So this is how it's done, constantly, right? Right. So this is Bill Ackman. And he basically blew Herbalife. He cost his investors, $1 billion, but he still gets paid big money. And you got to ask, yeah. Yeah. What is this about? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He was also up front in the attacks against Columbia.
Yes, he was. No, he at Harvard too. He's part of the moment that Claudine Gray was released as president. She resigned, right? He was behind that because she didn't answer properly at the hearings. Yeah. So we have problems, going forward. I'm going to stop the recording because, who knows? Yeah, I don't really mind, but yeah. But anyway, I'm looking forward to the micro fashions. To me, so far, it's a great book, but I really like chapter 5, to me. Yeah, on masculinity. It's very important. Yeah.
Now that you've turned off the recording, I'll tell you a funny story.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording then. Okay.
Yeah,